Hello, everyone, and welcome to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Group. I'm the advertising manager, and I get to be your host today. We want to start off by thanking our sponsor, which is the Weave a Real Piece. It's an incredible organization. If you don't know much about it, I encourage you to go check them out. They have just incredible information about weaving around the world and supporting weavers from around the world. And they're very, very active, and I think you'll be excited to learn more about them. And we want to say thank you. Thank you, Warp, for doing this. We appreciate it. As always, we'll take questions at the end of the show. If you will put them in the Q&A, I will try to get to as many as I can. Please don't put them in the chat because I don't always get to see those. Love your comments, though. Keep those coming, and we'll look for your questions in the Q&A. Today, we have Liz Gipson. Now, I love how Liz starts off her bio, and after you hear some more today, you're going to agree with this. She was smitten by small looms and big plans, and boy, is that true. She is a writer, a weaver, a teacher, a rigid-heddle weaving enthusiast who hosts Yarnworker, a popular site for rigid-heddle weavers, and the associated Yarnworker School. It's an online community-funded classroom. Liz has published 4 books, that's amazing, on rigid-heddle weaving, and she previously worked for all the biggies, Interweave, Schacht Spindle, and Craftsy. She's in various roles as far as editorial, marketing, video production. She's been there doing that. Liz embraces the idea that through weaving, we see all things: history, culture, science, technology, personal expression, economics, medicine, and so much more. It is a perfect medium for exploring mind, body, and spirit. And we are so excited to have her here today. Hello, Liz.
Hello, thank you for having me.
We are excited.
Excited to see so many friendly faces in the chat.
Yes. Well, let's start off with the important question. What is your favorite tea?
Oh, Tetley, no tags, $5 a box, and I'm good.
No fancy schmancy tea for you, right?
No. And milk, 2 sugars.
There you go. Like that sugar part. So if you would, talk to us about how you got started in fiber.
The loom. The first time I saw a loom in action among people in a studio, and that was it. And I was 6 years old. So it caught my imagination early, and not just the loom, but the entirety of the things that surround it, from sheep to people.
Well, you had an unconventional upbringing, I have to say. Your mother was an occupational therapy assistant, and she would take you with her to the hospital where she worked, and you got to be around the loom, help play on the loom, that sort of thing. You had a father who, quote unquote, blew up the TV, for all you John Prine fans. And that introduced you to another life of gardening and sheep and just kind of a different way of looking at things. How did all of that impact your choices in life, do you think?
Well, I was fortunate. You don't always think it at the time, because it was, that can also be a lot of chaos, but in chaos, there is creativity. And, my mom was many things. And so she worked in the occupational therapy as an assistant with Cindy Lally. And it was really Cindy Lally. I have Cindy's loom today, who made me the weaver I am. And she gathered her girls, which is what she called my mom, other ladies who are still lifelong friends. And this was in the psychiatric ward of the UVA hospital, and they would never let a kid, this would not happen, before deregulation. So we would go there, and there would be people, occupational therapy was like, hey, come down. There was a pottery studio too. Weave on these looms, have a good time. Cindy was a Mary Atwater trained weaver. So she had stacks of shuttlecraft in there. And I remember those old magazines because they looked like alchemy to me. I mean, they look like magic. And, students have heard this story many times. She was so engaging, and she would throw the shuttle, and I would run around to one side and grab it, and then run around to the other side of and throw it. And it enchanted me. And it just so happened that one lady who also worked there was a neighbor of my dad's who lived in the country and homesteaded and was the ultimate DIYer. And my mom really went into work in media. So we had restaurants, we worked with a theater company, we had so I had a lot of media experience. She worked for the local radio station and the television station. So I would go in and out of that. And I think those two things, as my dad said, he would never believe they could come together and work, but they somehow have.
Yeah, I wonder, there's that time in your life where the absolute positively worst thing you could be is different. Was there a time for you that having this different background in your life, like when you're, I guess it's like teen, preteen or whatever?
You know, I had a friend of mine I grew up with. She's a novelist in her own right, and she was raised by two famous novelists. And she would get asked the question, what's it like to be raised by famous writers? And her answer was always, what's it like not to be raised by famous writers? So, you know, when you're a kid, you don't really know. I mean, it was the 70s, and it's certainly, we were unconventional by many standards, but so were a lot of our friends and family and people that we were surrounded by. So we weren't, and at least in my family, the cohorts or family around us, being different was a good thing. You know, it was an okay thing to be. So
Oh, good.
Yeah. Not without its chaos. You know, certainly, you know, sometimes you would come into school and people would not understand what you were coming from, but
Well, kind of on that same continuation of theory or theme, your life is kind of like a culmination of very many different things that kind of came to a vortex. And it's almost like there was this little guardian angel looking down, and you said, okay, well, I'm watching over Liz, and she's going to need this class, and she's going to need this experience, and she's going to have to work for this company, and she'll need to take this internship to get her where she needs to be in the end. Would you agree to that? Because when I read about you, and it's like you had all the perfect experiences to come together.
I feel like when we look back at our lives, that's often the case. We didn't know whatever experience we're getting now leads us to the next experience. And I remember when I got my job at Interweave, it was my dad who said, I can't believe you actually made that work. Because to them, even though we were supposed to be different, you know, running off to New Zealand to study sheep made no sense, except that it was an adventure. You know, the things that I did didn't necessarily make sense at the time. And, you know, that's the way life is. We pull it together. We draw from what has come behind us, and somehow it makes sense if we're lucky.
Well, a good example of what we're talking about is the loss of your samples. Now, I know you've told this a lot and people may have heard it. I just think it's an amazing story. So would you share with us how you lost your samples and what it eventually led to your school, right?
Yeah. Well, you know, what does not break us makes us stronger. And it's also in quest of a good story. I think of Judith McKenzie when I say that, you know, if you can turn it into a good story, it's a good thing. So I had never, when I moved to New Mexico, so I had lived in Colorado for 25 years, I had to kind of reinvent myself here. And the thing that I could do was, I'd been doing video production for some companies, but I could teach. So I went on the road and taught and did the circuit, did a lot of things. And I was traveling to many conferences. So for the first time ever, I shipped my samples. Even though I had worked at Interweave forever and I had shipped things forever and I had insured things forever, I thought, what could go wrong? Well, you know, there was actually a train derailment of no one was hurt that I understand. It was like a cargo train, and my samples went flying off into the ether. And the box came back. I had this big box and it felt light and it was kind of crushed on one side. And I didn't look at it. You know how you kind of throw things in the back and because you're on to the next thing. And I went to open it and thought, there's some things missing. So I contacted the shop and I'm like, is there still, and you know, oh no, you know, we don't have it. And then I noticed there were grease stains on some of the things. And it's at that point they called and I had told them, they said, well, how much should we insure your box for? And I said, well, it's, you know, if this gets lost, then that's it. I'm going to give up. You know, it was a joke. And we put a small amount on there because they pay more. So I think it was like $300. So that's what I got back. And I really did think, is this a sign? I said, I shouldn't do this anymore, but that's not my way. And there was a video coming out with Interweave. I just done the double weave video with them. And so, you know, I've been surrounded by knit-alongs and all the stuff. I thought, all right, I got to reweave these samples. It kind of makes me tired. Does anyone want to do this with me? And so I had the video coming out from Interweave. That project had gone missing. I made a list of all the projects that had gone missing. And eventually in a year, we just rewove them all. We had 4 weave-alongs, a Facebook group, a blog post, chatting. And I literally had weaving friends who just found the pattern, rewove the piece in the yarns and the colors I used and sent it to me. I mean, it was a phenomenal amount of goodwill. And that's where I thought, you know, this is fun. We should keep doing this. And I did. You know, the technology had changed. When Craftsy came along, there was not a really easily accessible template like Teachable, Thinkific. You know, the technology wasn't there. So Craftsy was sort of this big, robust, they built this website, you know, that could do these things. And it was just on the merge where you could get those templates. And so I said, okay, here's a template. I know how to shoot video. Let's make this a more robust experience. And so I launched a Patreon campaign and the Yarnworker School. That was 7 years ago. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I admire that you reached out to people rather than, you know, just saying, oh, I got to do this myself. And what a great outcome. What a wonderful outcome.
Well, I think that comes both from my upbringing and being in show business, that you just, you know, you just have to put stuff out there and be ready to manage what comes back at you. Yeah.
Well, from all that I've read and heard about you, your focus is on teaching weavers, and maybe a better term would be helping weavers. You said that when you were asked, what do you make? I love this. You replied, weavers. I make weavers. So the other side of that coin, though, is do you ever wish that you could just weave for yourself rather than it's like taking care of everybody else, but not taking care of yourself? I mean, do you even have time to?
It's the beautiful part of what I do. I mean, there's sort of 2 sides to that question. And as one of my students said the other day, you know, I like to be the guide on the side, not the guru on the stage. It feels more, I feel more like a tour guide than I do feel like somebody who has wisdom and imparts it to somebody else. And I would not weave as much if I didn't have these kinds of deadlines and these kinds of parameters. So it makes me weave more. I would get the equivalent of what's writer's block if I just sat down at my loom and said, I can weave whatever I want. In this case, I can weave whatever I want, but all creativity likes constraints. And sometimes that people will say, well, you know, creativity, you have to be free. You have to have all, you know, you can do anything. Well, being able to do anything is really overwhelming. So giving ourselves some constraints, my loom type is a constraint. The fact that I mostly weave for publication is a constraint, that I often weave for teaching, but I use this philosophy of one for me, one for them. And what I mean by that is if I'm developing something new, the first thing I do is go to the loom and just weave or sample or swatch my gut feelings. And that's for me. And I don't really think about it. And then I use iterations of that for whatever might be an event or a lesson or a pattern or a, you know, something else. So it's a lovely way it's a lovely way to be a weaver.
It's almost like you talk the talk and you walk the walk, because that's what I think a weave along is. If for me, it would be a way of me focusing and having a goal at the loom. Because I agree, if I don't have something set up, I end up sitting at the loom kind of going, I have no idea what to do. So it's almost like it's a parallel that you offer to people what you know works for you too.
Yes. I think that's it. I am you. You know, that's, there's no different, you know, I'm a weaver who's a weaver who shares the weaving. Yeah.
Well, then let's talk some about your weaving. What is a woven work that you're proud of? What's something that you've done, either a series or one piece or whatever?
You know, it's a continuum. I think it's a sort of that's a hard question, because pride is a hard question. I think whatever piece I have just woven and allows me to get away with it, I like. Here's an example. Thank you, Mandy. So this piece, I always think of the mirror. The blue piece with the waves is an example of one for me. And I love this piece, and I've showed it a lot in the past year. And it speaks to the way I think about weaving and design and life and all kinds of things. And I was quite tickled with it. The other piece, the little, what I call my runette, the folks who hang with me know that I weave minimum viable runners or minimum viable scarves or minimum viable. This piece is an example, so that you can work things out, is an example of what I would offer to others. And then I have this other piece to show as aspirational. So this is summer and winter. The finer piece in 2 colors is one texture, where this piece would take 16 shafts and 9 treadles to weave. On my rigid-heddle loom, I need 2 heddles and a pickup stick. So, you know, it's, and the other piece is one we used as a case study in our multi-heddle study group. And it shows you how to change the pickup stick arrangement. It shows you how to try out the 3 textures of summer and winter. It's in a thicker grist, so you can kind of get more immediate satisfaction. So that's the sort of instructional design part of it that goes. And it also just, I didn't even think about this, but it is the workshop I'm teaching at Convergence.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah. How smart.
What is the one on the right? What is that?
The one on the right is summer and winter. And it's the 3 textures. So columns, bricks, and blocks. And it's what I call a runette in terms of actually what it is, but the structure is summer and winter.
What's it sitting on?
Oh, it's sitting on my little fireplace. It's a little electric fireplace.
Oh,
yeah.
I forgot what it was.
What is this thing? And my dog sits in front of it. Even in the middle of summer when it's really hot, we just turn on the light and he just loves it.
Whatever gets you through the day, right? You have, well, this kind of goes back to what you were just saying about teacher students that, excuse me, that you have said, I love April and all the stuff that's blooming right now. You have said that who the teacher is and who the student is can shift. Would you talk some more about that?
Yeah, students are so insightful. I remember, and sometimes it's just a matter of a question and they don't realize that they are teaching me. You know, if people want teachers to have the answers, then what we often do is give you our best answer as we understand it at the time. I remember being at Kentucky Sheep and Wool a long time ago. And there was a student there. I was teaching the standard 2-heddle threading and showing everyone all the things we could do on it. And a hop sack is always a favorite. And he said, well, can't we do this on a single heddle and cram it? I was like, yeah, and that would be a lot easier. And that started my journey of like, okay, here are the options: 1 heddle, 2 heddle, 3 heddle, you know, these are the ways you can break it down. Here's the advantage of this way. Here's the other advantage of that way. So, you know, my favorite environment to work in is where questions are encouraged, observations are encouraged, and we're kind of all working towards a common goal. You know, I teach in a university environment, and I didn't really, the way I think of my work, you know, with at the university, a lot of the instructors, professors, teachers, you spend 1/3 of your time doing research and 1/3 of your time publishing and 1/3 of your time teaching. And that really feels like how I divide that time. And the teaching is all about dialogue, you know, that you have prepared, but it's a dialogue based on your own research and your own writing. And so the teaching kind of comes after that process, so that they give you dialogue, which is the same as having like peer review, peer feedback. You get that feedback loop, and then you can come back and write stronger sentences. And they tell me without even knowing they're telling me what to do next, because their questions are like, well, what about this? I'm like, oh, I should go off, figure out how that happens, and then we'll have another experience.
Oh, what a great way to think about that. That's a great way to think about that. So where you're teaching now at the university, or you did at one time?
I do. I live in Socorro, New Mexico, which is a small town in central New Mexico, and it's where New Mexico Tech is. So it's their science.
Oh,
and
okay, New Mexico Tech. Okay.
And it's 2,000 students, and I teach a semester-long class in rigid-heddle in this wonderful environment because it's too few students to make the classes run. So they open it up to community members. And if you're over 65, you can take the class for $5 plus the materials fee. So it's a great deal. And then faculty also get it as a benefit. That's the way they can keep the classes going. So my classes have students who are studying science, retirees, and community members. And we even get students from the high school who can take classes at the university. So it's just a really wonderful, and they are my ultimate test group, because before I publish anything, I teach it to this group. So I always tell them they're my test subjects. And then we make it better. Then I can go out, because the weave-alongs or the community, I mean, oftentimes you can be teaching it to, you know, 1,000 people, and you kind of want to have it dialed in at that point. Yeah. You don't want to be experimenting on that.
What a great eclectic group. All kinds of people.
Yeah, it's pretty terrific, along with the Patreon community. I mean, they're the same. They feel like my classroom in the cloud, that they're the ones, I mean, they're the ones that really make everything I do possible. And we just have a great time.
Well, this next piece is a churro sheep rug. It's a little rug. You told me that. It's a little rug, but it was made on a small loom. Now, you seem not to realize you can't do that. You know, you can't do that. And I think that's one of the things I admired when I was reading about you, is that you seem to find ways to do what can't be done, or at least you're willing to try it. So tell us first about this work, and then talk a little bit about that explorer in you.
Well, I think it's an interesting question. When you work in the cants often come from, because we're not stopping to define what is a rug. I mean, really, what is it? It's, you know, a piece of fabric on the floor. It's, you know, I don't think, and this particular piece is a mini rug. We had a mini rug weave along. I adore the churro sheep. I'm very fortunate to live in an area with 3 strong weaving traditions, 4 or 5 actually, between puppet weavers, the Dene, Navajo weavers, the Rio Grande style tradition, European traditions. So we have a really rich history, and this kind of patterning shows up in almost every culture. But that little Navajo churro sheep makes it something special. And so when we say things like it can't be done, we're defining it in the way we define weaving, instead of defining the textile and saying, how can I weave this? And I think that's because often we are coming from a place of our own experience. Where else can we come from? But that so much of the American hand weaving tradition is ground in this rising shed jack loom shaft experience. Even balance and countermarch and ABLs, they're sort of not as hardcore. So we think we've been told, not enough tension, not a heavy enough beater, but people were making rugs long before those looms were invented. So it can be done.
I like that. I like that. Well, this next image, I love this image. When I saw this image and saw the name of it, I was like, this is perfect for Liz. This is Liz. Now, this way it says, go your own way. So it kind of can be seen as a reflection of your own life. So when you were making it, was that what you were thinking about? Did it occur to you later?
I was actually thinking of two very specific weavers when I made this, and they are two weavers who definitely went their own way, and that's Annie Albers and Theo Mormon.
Wow, yeah.
It's really an homage to the Theo Mormon technique without the same structural arrangement, because this is what I call onlay. And Theo Mormon was even a little embarrassed that everything was named after her, because she's like, this isn't, I hate the phrase, this isn't rocket science, but she well, as she said, was not patient enough for tapestry, so she wanted to draw. And what she really did was create a way to lay the yarns on top of the fabric. And the back of this looks completely different. And so it makes those yarns pop as opposed to inlay where the yarns lay inside. And so it was just sort of a rigid heddle way to do that with a single heddle of thick and thin yarn. And then Annie Albers, who was the queen of the squiggles, it was just, that's what I was thinking of when I made the piece. We wove it along during the first few months of the pandemic. So we used it as a weave along. It's from Handwoven Home, and we changed it to weave our way through. So the thing I love about weaving, and people know this, is that we can work out big feelings, and there's so much that goes on in our head and our life, and it all gets captured in that cloth. It's almost like we can give the cloth that experience, and every time we look at it, that's what we'll think of. We will think of what's in our head, and other people won't see that, but we do, and that's all cloth needs to do for any of us. To me, it doesn't matter if anyone doesn't get the point I was thinking of when I wove it. It's that I get it.
Well, the next image we have is two little looms, because you are a fan of the little looms. You are the queen of the little looms. If Annie Albert is the queen of the squiggly, you're the queen of the little looms. So first of all, would you talk a little bit about these two looms? And then just talk about these looms from your point of view.
Well, I was trained as a floor loom weaver. As I said, the loom is what brought me to textiles, and I loved them. And through a series of events, I really came to love the loom on the left is the Schacht Flip. And it has 3 heddles. You don't have to have 3 heddles, but it's a rigid heddle loom. And I've always thought of the rigid heddle loom as a sweet spot between the frame loom and the floor loom, because for me, it reflects the work of the hand, but it still gives me that mechanical assist. And I like handwork. I like yarn. I like a personal, up close and personal experience with what I'm working with. The other loom is the Swatchmaker loom, which I collaborated with Angela Smith of Purl and Loop, which I've now absorbed that loom line. And it came about when I was working on Handwoven Home. And I really, if you're a production weaver, you're working on a deadline, you need to do something fast. For me, I just reached out to her because I needed a tool in order to quickly assess set and color, and this gave me a way to swatch. I worked on Knitting Daily TV. I worked around all these knitters, and they hated to swatch, and I was jealous. Like, I wanted to be able to swatch. And so, but I didn't want, you can use any frame loom. You don't have to have, these looms come in the sets I most commonly use with a single heddle. So 8, 10, and 12. So I can take a 5 dent loom and wrap 2 yarns around every slot and, you know, put some sumac in there and turn that into a loom. But I really wanted yarns, looms in the sets I use, and also the set checker just itself. I wanted to see what the spacing looked like without setting up the loom. I mean, a lot of people think of the rigid-heddle loom as their swatching loom. So this was just a natural progression for me. And also I think it was Sharon Alderman that said, you know, weavers need to be comfortable in their own company, which I can weave alone forever, but I can't weave alone in the same place. I hated being stuck behind a loom in a single room, and I couldn't go outside. I couldn't take it with me. I couldn't, you know, and when you're traveling, that stuff is going, you're inspired everywhere. Everything you see looks like weaving. And so between the rigid-heddle loom and the swatch maker, you know, weaving goes where I go. And I think that was a great appeal for me. I mean, coming to rigid-heddle was because I could iterate faster. As my ideas at the loom, you have this great idea, and it just allowed me to do that. Yeah.
So when you saw Pearl and Loop, let's see if I get this right, you liked what they had, but then you went to her and said, you know, but what I really need is, right?
Yeah. So she had a little loom that was in a set of 6, and it was in this really stiff paperboard. And
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
she was working toward, anyway, Angela and I just talked. We were just talking, and I said, hey, you know, because she worked in a fab lab. So she worked in a place that had, you know, she was really into manufacturing. That was also part of her love, is to create those systems. And so you could design a CAD drawing, or I forget the file name, and put it into the laser and come up with something. And the thing with Angela is, I called her, I'm like, hey, because people called her up all the time. People call up people all the time with, you know, ideas.
Oh, yeah.
They
call us. We're like, we don't
yeah.
make anything. Where you call
Yeah, exactly. You know, we should have, and the thing is, when you make things, you're interested in these ideas. People have good ideas, but you know, she almost didn't call me back because she was just thinking, oh, okay, because we had talked to the conference, but she's like, oh, you know, we hit it off. I'll call her. I'll hear her out. And then I don't know, we spoke the same language. It worked for her. She could see where this would fit into her product line. And it was a great collaboration. And so I was her consultant. She wasn't a weaver in the sense. She had all the wonderful enthusiasm of frame. You know, sometimes coming to weaving with no weaving experience is a good thing, not a bad thing. And so she had all this enthusiasm and had already had these lines going. And so I helped her with instructions and things. And then when she decided to go into wine importation, she became my consultant. So now I have just the swatchmaker loom line, and I call her up and say, okay, you know, I'm getting these wood samples. I have this file. Okay, let's talk to the engineer. And so the tables have turned.
Well, it's interesting because I bought the Pearl and Loop loom years ago, and I don't know who I bought it from or where, when, or whatever. And so it was so fun when I was reading about you. It's like, oh, I know that loom. I have that loom. But then if I can plug one of your publications here, you know, shamelessly plug this for you, you have this wonderful download on how to use it. You know, what can you do with this loom and that kind of thing, which leads me into my next question, which I love, because you said one of the assets of these little looms is they help you fail faster. And at first it was like, I fail plenty, thank you. I don't think I need to do it faster. But would you explain what that means?
Yeah, it's in the startup, when I was working at Craftsy, that's where I got my plunge into startup communities, which I found was not my people. But you know, there's a lot of jargon going around, and one of them is fail faster. But I needed that for when I was working on Handwoven Home, because I didn't have time to keep up with the pace of your ideas. You have to figure out, is this a good idea or a bad idea? Right. And the only way you're going to know is go to the lab. As I said, you do your research and figure it out. Or, you know, this is what pattern designers do. They do this research for you, and then you start and modify from there. So say you want to change the set, you want to change the color. well, do I want to commit an entire cone of yarn to that, a ball of yarn to that? If I can swatch, then I can figure out, how does it wash? How does it clean? Is the set right? How does the finishing work? How do I want to do the fringe? All of these things with a little quantity of yarn. And then you may say, oh, I got it. Or no, this idea didn't work. And sometimes we just pivot on the loom. You don't have to swatch to do that. But the idea is, because sampling is kind of a dirty word, right? Folks don't want to sample. And that's often because they're not, they're not, and you may have different goals too, right? Your goal isn't to design a piece, you want to make a blanket. But even then, having this tool that helps you get that information quicker, then it ultimately saves you time and yarn in the long run. And doodling. I mean, I just love to doodle, so it allows me to do that.
I like that. Yarn doodling.
I'm just surrounded by little tiny itty bitty. This was like 5 little swatches I did just to get a lace thing worked out. And sometimes it's just, I have to refine my ideas while I'm using my hands, right? I could certainly refine them by just taking a hike, but there's something about actually doing it that works it out for me.
Well, I was thinking that I think sometimes, and I probably other people do this too, but when I think about sampling, it's like, oh, warp my 4 harness and do all of this. And I think I have to shift and think, like you said, I need to do it faster and not think I have to do the whole loom. I can just do this little piece first. So maybe I won't. But I just downloaded a really good ebook that's going to explain all that to me. And I'm like, good. Hey, and before I forget, explain to people what is the book you've been talking about, Home.
Oh, Handwoven Home
Handwoven Home, sorry.
Yeah, Handwoven Home is the second book I wrote with Interweave. So, and it came out, so I wrote Weaving Made Easy, which was really, it's a project book that I wrote. But the 2 books I wrote with Interweave had really specific purposes within that environment, because, we'd kind of tried to get Betty Davenport to revise her book. Because hands-on rigid-heddle weaving is just, it says it all. It does it all. And, we, at the time, we were hand illustrating. So we had different opportunities. But Betty was on to other things, and that just wasn't in her future. And so Jane Patrick and I kind of divided it up, because Jane said, I don't want to teach people to weave, but I want to show them everything you could do on this loom. And I'm like, I love to teach people to weave. I'll do that part. And so, Weaving Made Easy and A Weaver's Idea Book came out of that piece. And then Handwoven Home was a follow-up for me for Weaving Made Easy. I moved to this house. I actually live in what used to be a school, and then it was bought by a church. And so it's kind of ironic. And I thought, I'm going to weave for myself. I'm going to weave something for every room in this house. And I had a little sabbatical, and I was just going to weave for myself. I'd never had a chance to do it. So I started doing it and having a blog, and I went to a conference, and someone said, that would make a great book. So I said, well, okay. Anyway, then it became a book, and I'd had maybe half the projects done. And so it's like next, the follow-up to Weaving Made Easy with projects that are just for the home, because that's what weaving excels at.
Well, I think what's interesting is that, and I have to admit, I was a weaving snob. I was like, oh no, not rigid-heddle. You have to have a floor loom. And I think part of the problem was all I saw was, oh, here you can make this coaster on a rigid-heddle. And now the things that you see, I mean, Jane's book came out. There was a XRX had a book that came out. Your books, if you really can see how people have really taken it to the next level, I think. And again, I guess I'm being kind of snotty, but what people are doing now on rigid-heddles is just amazing. Kind of like, you can't do that, but boy, are they ever.
Well, it's, publishing, again, the internet, I came into publishing when I joined Handwoven. We had just gotten email. I mean, interweave, you know, it's hard to say what the last 30 years have done in terms of raising the visibility of what people do. So it's my belief that people were always doing amazing things, but we didn't see it and it wasn't published. And so that's what's really helped. And it's also helped, you know, communities grow up without necessarily having permission to do so. You know, they don't know that there's these rules and these systems, and they find themselves on Reddit, or they start a group and then they find the literature later. And so that more than itself, I think we spend more time talking about weaving than necessarily our loom of choice. And again, publishing really drives a lot of that. What we see is what we do. And so much of publishing has been shaft loom material. And rigid-heddle is so shaft loom adjacent. I mean, more than any other loom, you know, the tapestry looms or inkle looms, or, you know, we share a little bit of this commonality. So it's, yeah. I mean, I had that. I wanted a shaft loom. My first real loom was a rigid-heddle. And I had to have the person, I was working on an alpaca farm, and she had to kind of talk me into it. And I was a hand spinner, and it was great. Because it was really rigid-heddle friendly. And I was still like, I took an incomplete from my fiber arts program, the minor, so I could still use the dye room. And so, but you know, I put it aside as soon as I could get a floor loom. And then I realized I don't have the patience for that. The coding, it just wasn't my world. I had to go back to this world of a lot of this along with this.
Well, this next image we're going to show is a piece of plain weave that you wove. And I think this plain weave is a lovely example of how simplicity has its own beauty. The colors, they just seem to dance, you know, they're so visible, a lot of energy there. So do you think using a simpler loom has changed how you worked with color? Does that make a difference at all?
I have lots of thoughts on color. And I was just reading a review of Annie Albers in the New York Times. I think it was out, and it's you know, her prints, she moved on to printmaking, or moved into printmaking. And it reminded me of a quote from her book where on weaving, where she says, color should be your third consideration. Interesting, being, you know, married to a colorist, but in weaving, and then, you know, what's first and second, and that is the yarn and the texture. And so for me, when I look at weaving, and I come from a more sort of modernist tradition, oftentimes structure gets in the way of, and also structure can get in the way of color. So, you know, I can't claim any color for this. You know, the yarn did the work because it's a variegated yarn. And when I was in college, my professor, wonderful Tom Lumberg, said to me, and this is my relationship with color, so the second part of the conversation. So I lean towards this sort of Scandinavian sort of mid-century aesthetic. But he said, in passing, natural dyes never clash. And I became a natural dyer because I was so afraid of color. And I thought, well, if I just dye natural colors, they'll never clash. And in fact, that's really, I owe my entire career to that sentence, because we happened to have a conference at CSU where I got to know the folks from Interweave, because they had a natural dye conference and I volunteered for it. And I was the only natural dyer in the room. But I since have moved on to realize I need to think about yarn, and I need to think about texture. And then my colors tend to be thinking about value contrast, thinking about hue contrast, and I stick to some very simple color rules. But I mean, I can't recommend no one better than Tian Chu. I mean, in terms of color and weaving, she's nailed it. And she finally cracked the code and has created systems that are really accessible and really wonderful. And, you know, thank her for doing all that work, because weaving and color is a completely different beast. If you try to apply color theory, often it just like goes right out the window.
Yeah.
So less is more, I guess, is in my my view. And it depends on our relationship to the word complexity and the word simplicity. And, you know, why is one lesser than and one more than, or vice versa?
So what's next for you?
More of the same. I could say the ongoing, I've been working on a new guide, a Weaver's Guide to Structures. So I am trying to create a system to help explain structures from a rigid-heddle perspective. And really, you know, a lot of things are like, how do I know what draft I can use? How can I weave that structure? How can I, so it's that, you know, the dreaded, like, how do I know which of these 4 shaft, 8 shaft, 16 shaft, how do I know what I can weave? And it's a little bit of combination of theory, and then there's a whole bunch of swatches in the back with a whole bunch of threading. So, you know, you can just dive in and do it. And I could not do that without the Patreon community. They have been so patient. And it's been a think tank operation because I've been teaching what I've been writing, and they have made the sentences so much better. And so that has been a big, I mean, it's been like 2 years I've been working on this project. It's to the tech editor. Still tried to finish it up. I was hoping to have it ready by Convergence, but you know, what is it? I love deadlines as they go whooshing by, or whatever the saying is. And I'm grateful to have the opportunity to kind of dance those dances. I'm working on a new platform for our community. We're kind of like, we started this little house on Patreon, and I added the school, and then we have these live streams, and then I've like built all these additions to the house. So we're going to have a one hub room that folks have been patiently waiting on. And it's the ongoing community of the Patreon community of, and Patreon, for folks who may not know, it's a way sort of to crowdsource musicians, artisans, people. It's a way to keep us in our seats because, you know, getting a paycheck can be hard. And so it's like PBS, they pledge a little bit and we give them our work, and they get to see behind the scenes in doing it. So book, new site, weaving. The weave alongs will return. I am so excited to get to that space eventually. So more of the same. And Convergence, teaching a Convergence. I want to give a big shout out to Weave a Real Piece. I've been a member for 20 years. I couldn't believe it when I saw they sponsored this. I'm going to their annual meeting in May, which is in Colorado. Please join us. Colorado Weavers Day is the same time. We would love to see you there. I'd love to meet you in person. It's a networking organization for people who are interested in continuing textile traditions. I think of these continuous textile traditions as like our weaver's genetic material for those of us who we just owe them such a debt of gratitude in so many ways. So.
Well, we have a couple of questions. Oh,
Okay.
right now time. I'm sorry, I didn't watch time very well today. You were just too interesting. Everybody's asking about Tien Chu, and it's in the chat, her name. And if you want to learn more, go to her website. You'll just get blown away. She's amazing. She was on here, so if you want to go back and watch her Textiles Tea, amazing.
And the Handweavers Academy. I actually saw Janet was the first one who came up. She teaches there, so she has her color classes.
There you go. Thank you, Janet. This is from Susan Kelsler Simpson. Not a question, but when someone says it can't be done, I take it as a challenge. Way to go, Susan. Exactly. Oh, they want to know about the Swatch Maker loom. Where is that available?
So yarnworker.com, the Swatch Maker looms are available there in my shop. So you'll see a little shop and they're there. I do have a limited supply right now because I'm, like everyone else, still trying to figure out this new supply chain. And I just haven't given as much. It's there. All the looms are there. Yeah, you can get them from me.
Okay. Sorry, a lot of these are about Tien. I want to make sure. We got through
I know.
those.
This is the thing. If you mention somebody who's nailed color, everybody is going to stick their head up in the air and say, I got to know
color. Little gophers come out of the hole.
I'm the opposite. Say color and I run the other way.
Well, I have to admit, I listened to a lecture. It was a very brief talk she did. And she said something that was kind of like, boom. Oh my gosh. I've never heard it explained that way before. So I encourage you all to check her out. Would you talk about the pieces on the rack behind you next to the door?
Oh yeah. And this is where I do all my live streaming. So a lot of this stuff is like works in progress, not necessarily. So a lot of these are pieces that I've been working on for the guide. And so, you know, there's double cloth at the top, which is actually a collaborative piece I did with my stepfather. He likes to design graphic arts, and anyway. Summer and winter, clasp weft in structure. Yes, you can do it. Double weave again. There's a twill. It's a 1-2 twill, color and weave, which was a weave along. It's the last official weave along we did, and then a lace piece in tencel. So they're just one of the things I've had to do is weave a lot of little pieces of fabric in order, you know, it's like if you ever look at Davidson and you just see the stacks of little pieces of fabric. These are more full length, but you know, it has just been tiny little bits. And then, you know, all of these, I mean, these are things that I wear. Well, actually, you can't probably see. Now I'm saying something you can't see.
Oh, there you
But
go.
these are all stuff in progress. And then, so clasp weft in overshot, and then some those are actually things I wear. But yeah.
Well, people are talking about how rigid heddles have progressed over the years. And they're talking about, this is from Cass, and she's saying, my Becca from 1974 is not the same as our looms today. And then somebody else, Julie Kip, says, I have the old Becca. And she wants to know, what do you think of the new, like last to 10 to 15 years, rigid heddles that have been added? How's that changed things, the new?
A lot. And you know, a lot. And there's two sort of style of heddle blocks, but it really started with the introduction of the knitter's loom from Ashford. And when Ashford introduced the knitter's loom, everybody started, and that's usually the way it goes. Then you know, they were trying to capitalize on the popularity of knitting. This is at the turn of the century. So like 2000, they introduced it. And I remember going to a store and they had a prototype and they're like, hey, come weave on this. You know, it's sort of like hey, look what I got. And just light years, just features in it that were good. The heddle block was more sophisticated. You know, there's a tilting action. So Schacht got busy and came out with the Cricut and the Flip, which both were really, you know, the Cricut was a game changer for price point, but those curves in the Cricut were not possible until you came around with the CNC machines, because you could not do production curves. And those curves really make a difference in the weaving. And so that there was a loom in the 50s that looked very similar, but it's all angles, you know, there's all angles. And the curve of the Cricut was really what made the difference. I was working at Schacht at that time when the Cricut came out. The Flip, I think, came first. And it was an upgrade to their standard rigid heddle, which is what I started teaching on. And the Flip has things like the locking pin. It was the first commercial loom that had a third slot. The third slot was not really there thinking of 3 heddles. It was there to aid in warping 2 heddles.
Oh.
And so, but because it was the only one that had a slot, you could do things. So it was, and then all, you know, other loom companies ensued. You know, the Flip has beams. So it has those beams that keep your extra beams that keep your sheds more even, the tensioning even, just added a lot of simple, but really effective things. And it's always whatever something's greatest strength is often its greatest weakness as well. And so there's things like, well, we should add this and that and the other thing to the loom, but then it also, then you're just turning it into, well, you should just turn it into a shaft loom. You know, there's certain constraints that come in with where you can go. So the looms today, and I think I don't even talk about it as much because it's been 20 years since folks have made these changes. So most of the looms that people experience today, certainly not everyone, because the used loom market is strong, are very different. And that also led to changing attitudes about using it.
Well, I have to admit, I was when I first used a rigid-heddle loom, I was ready to pitch it up and throw it across the room. It was so frustrating. And then the next rigid-heddle loom I used, I found out that it had a place to set the heddle. The
Yeah.
other place did not. The other one didn't. So I had to hold it and throw the. Sorry, too many moves for my little brain to do. So I get it that it always changes.
And that Becca, like all of David's and Ox's work was done on those early Beccas, I mean, they're still I mean, they're an amazing loom, and they've added new heddle blocks, but you know, the warping experience and the teeth on the front. So we always have to remember that our attitudes based on past experiences doesn't mean our current experiences are going to be the same.
It's true.
Things change. Things change.
Yes, they do. Well, one thing that has changed is that we have to stop for the day.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on here, Liz. I have to say, I'm kind of a fan. I've known your name forever, and I was so excited to finally meet you and get to talk with you. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah, yay weaving.
We'll see you this summer at Convergence.
Looking forward to it.
All right. If you want to know more, and there is a ton to know, go see Liz's website, which is yarnworker.com, and check out all she has to offer. She's incredibly generous with her knowledge and her time. So go check that out. It's pretty amazing. I do want to thank our sponsor, Weave a Real Piece. And as she said, they are going to have their conference May 15th to the 18th. I guess it's not really a conference, it's a meetup, but it's also streaming. So if you can't physically be there, you can watch it also. So go to their website, which is weavearealpiece.org, and you can learn more about that and more about their programming and everything they do. They're a pretty amazing group of people. So thank you, Weave a Real Piece. We appreciate you doing this, and we'll see you in May. We appreciate it so much. If you would like to sponsor an episode of Textiles and Tea, you can do that by going on the website and looking up the tab for Textiles and Tea, and then you can purchase a sponsorship there. It could be you as a person, a group of people getting together. We've got more of those coming up. Your business, your guild, whatever. We would appreciate that. We've got Convergence coming up. Liz is going to be there. There's places in her class yet if you want to sign up. We encourage you to do that. A lot of the classes that we had that were closed are expanding. We've been contacting the teachers and asking them if they would be able to add more people to their classes. So if you wanted to take a class and it was closed, get a minute, go back online and check to see if their space is available. Also, that's why it's really important to jump on the wait list, because you never know who's going to be able to take more students, or if somebody decides they can't take the class or another class opens up and they switch to that. So be sure you check and see if the class that you wanted is now available. Marketplace Mondays. This is new. I'm so excited about this because it has to do with vendors. They're my people. We are starting that this year in May. Every Monday, we are going to highlight the vendors who are going to be at the marketplace. So, you know, we try to get organized and know what we're going to buy before we get there. And then we don't know what we're going to get, or we miss something. Here's your chance to watch the vendors, and they're going to showcase what they're bringing. If it's a new loom, a new kind of yarn, equipment that everybody's always looking for, they're going to talk about that. So this will be great to get organized before you come to Convergence. As always, it will be recorded and you can catch it later, but be sure you go sign up so that you'll get your Zoom link and you can watch. It's every Monday in May. There's 3 episodes a day, and then we'll do however many vendors per session. And they will talk, like I said, they're going to talk about what's great, what's coming to Convergence, and we're all going to be so organized. It'll be wonderful. But just a reminder, don't forget to take that little suitcase that you can put inside your suitcase so you can bring it all home. That's important. We also are going to have a new tour. I'm excited about this. It's wonderful. We're going to have a Pauline, who is the juror for Small Expressions. She teaches at the Kansas City Art Institute, and she is going to be part of the tour. We're going to go there. They have a TC2, so if you've never seen one in action, you'll get to see that. AVL 16 Shaft Compu Dobby. If you've never been there, we went there this past year and it's amazing. It's one of those situations where you go, I want to go back to school and I want to go to school there. Their fiber program is top notch and it's going to be a great tour to go see what all they're doing and the latest and the greatest. And they're so inventive. It's wonderful. And then they're going to go to the University of Kansas and they're going to see the textile studios there, the faculty studios, and the grad studios. You're going to see all the things that they have to offer at the University of Kansas. And then the last part will be the Spencer Museum of Art. And they're going to bring out their textiles that aren't even on display, but they're going to bring those out just for us to see. It's a great tour. It's just opened up. If you're still thinking you might want to take a tour, go check it out and sign up quick. We also we still have our scholarships available. At the 18th is the deadline. If you are a student in an accredited program, you don't even have to be full-time, but if you're a student in an accredited program in the United States or Canada, this is a wonderful way to supplement your education. Up to $4,000 will be given away. So be sure that you go on the website, go under scholarships and grants and look at the guidelines. Now you're going to have to jump on it because you have to get your recommendations in from your school also. But it's a great way to help with your education. And that's what HGA is here to do. We want to keep those weavers coming. Get deadline April the 18th, so don't forget. We want to thank everybody for supporting our programs, and your donations and your membership help things keep going, whether it's Textiles and Tea, Careers in Textiles, scholarships and grants. Those also come from donations from you all, and we do appreciate that. If you've missed any of the episodes, you can watch them again. All of you who want to know who Tian is, go look her up. She had a great program, and they're all on Facebook, our HGA Facebook page, or you can see them on YouTube. And as always, if you'd rather watch YouTube, be sure you subscribe because then you'll get a notice when one's been uploaded. If you also become a member, someone's reminding me, you got to become a member too. It supports HGA. That's important. You're also going to need to be a member if you're taking a class at Convergence this summer. And your membership helps keep all these programs going as well as your donations. Next week, we are going to have Demetrio Batista Lazo. He is out of South America and does these incredible tapestries. They're just beautiful. They're these rugs that rich in color, beautiful technique. And if you've never heard him before, he is a delight to listen to. You'll really enjoy him. So have a wonderful week. I will see you next Tuesday, and happy tea.